I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast, the continuation of Sherlock Holmes month.
Indeed. And for week 2 of Sherlock Holmes month, we will be discussing 2 Sherlock Holmes films, both featuring the same Holmes and Watson. That would be Basil Rathbone. Basil Rathbone is an English actor at a long career. He has appeared previously on the podcast in 1938's The Adventures of Robin Hood. He worked a long time. He made a bunch of these movies. That's probably what he's best known for. But he continued to work, and in his later years, he made a lot of schlock because he liked to work. And so he was, for example, in Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet, which is absolutely horrible. And then the only other member of the cast of real note is Nigel Bruce, who played Dr. Watson. Nigel Bruce had a fairly long career himself. He was in a film that I'm kind of partial to called The Trail of the Lonesome Pine from 1936.
Yeah.
It's one of the first color films, and it is set in the vicinity of Big Stone Gap, Virginia, where I served part of my mission. And then he was also in Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca in 1940, among other films.
So it occurred to me as this started, Watson is an integral part to any Holmes story. Mm-hmm. And yet, in every adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, nobody really seems to pay that much attention to what actor plays Watson. You refer to it as the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes, not the Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce.
Yeah. Mm.
Also, now, am I correct? Did I read that Basil Rathbone did 14 of these?
That sounds right. He did quite a few of these.
That's
were
quite
short.
A lot.
They were usually around an hour. I think the longest one was like 75 minutes.
Yeah. Now, the 2 that we watched tonight, they're both now public domain. Are all of them now public domain?
I would assume so.
Okay.
So the 2 that we will be discussing this evening:
Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon from 1943, and Sherlock Holmes in Terror by Night
from 1946.
Yep.
These are what are sometimes referred to as programmers. These are kind of fillers. These are shorter films, usually around an hour in length. They usually have, well, at least many of them did, have kind of a mystery element, and they would have the central character who's sometimes kind of gimmicky, and then they just have a different mystery for however long. And so a couple other examples of popular programmers from the 1940s, 30s, and 40s were the brash Bancroft films starring Ronald Reagan as a Secret Service agent, not a protect a politician's Secret Service agent, but a fight counterfeiter's Secret Service agent. They made about 4 of those. The first one's good. The other ones are kind of crap. They made a whole bunch of the Charlie Chan films. They even outlived their original Charlie Chan and had to recast. There's the Crime Doctor films starring, I'll say, George Brent or Warren Baxter, about a psychologist that solves crimes. There's Mr. Wong's Detective, which is basically a ripoff of Charlie Chan. There's the Bulldog Drummond films that are kind of like Sherlock Holmes. And obviously, Dick Tracy and The Shadow. So there was a whole bunch of these. This one had more literary merit than a bunch of them. But these films are updated from the Victorian setting of the original novels and stories to the 1940s.
Yeah.
So you've got Holmes facing off against Nazis and others. But going into this, both of these films I'd seen, but I had completely forgotten that I'd seen one of them until it started. I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen this. But you knew basically nothing about him. You knew...
I'm aware of Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes. I'd seen parts of a couple of them, but I'd never actually seen one of these in its entirety prior to tonight.
They were really, for a long time, they were kind of the actors to play those parts. They were kind of iconic in those roles. And they really are. I think they're from what I remember, pretty faithful to the characterizations in the books. But they're also really, in some ways, not all that interesting.
I actually felt like this version is lighter than the books.
Oh, okay.
The books generally tend to be a little bit smarter, and also, I'm not sure what words I'm trying to use here, generally seem to have a little bit more intrigue to them. In particular, Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon, I really saw the appeal of that one. And watching that, I actually turned to you at one point and said, okay, I can see why they would have made a whole series of these. I felt like that was the better of the 2. It was quite fun. The updated setting of that one was actually kind of refreshing as well. So you didn't miss it not being in a Victorian setting in that one.
So we'll talk about the films individually, but so your preference was for Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon over Sherlock Holmes and Terror by Night.
Yes.
Which is funny because mine's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
I preferred Terror by Night. Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon I thought was okay, but I thought the other one was funner.
There were aspects to the Secret Weapon that were more, I guess, more obvious. You know, didn't require as much effort to figure out, but I felt like the pacing was a little bit better. It maintained a better sense of intrigue, but yeah.
So Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon starts out in Switzerland.
Yes.
Sherlock Holmes is there to retrieve Dr. Tobler,
Yes.
a Swiss weapons expert, and sneak him out of the country to England.
And Dr. Tobler has made a very advanced bomb site, and they have to sneak the bomb site out of the country and distract the Nazis so they can get to a secret airfield to get Dr. Tobler out of the country and back to England.
You know, I'm going to reference the other film a little bit, too, because both these films, especially when viewed together, remind me of one of my favorite films, Night Train to Munich.
Yeah.
Because in The Secret Weapon, you got to get your weapons specialist scientist out of Central Europe, and you got to trick the Nazis, and then you got to drive by night to get to the airfield and get them out. Whereas Terror by Night is almost entirely set on a train.
Yeah.
It even has more train time than Night Train to Munich does. But anyway, they get him to England, and he's hiding something because he sneaks out at night. Again, I've seen both these two films, but like 15 plus years ago. So I had forgotten much of it. And so he's kind of suspicious when he gets there. And you're like, is this also like Night Train to Munich? Is this an organized, like a fake escape, a fake defection? But no, Dr. Tobler is on the up and up, but he's paranoid, and reasonably so. So he has this plot to divide up the manufacture of his sophisticated bomb site among 4 different scientists and make sure that they don't know what the other is doing to keep it safe.
And no one can piece together the bomb site without all 4 pieces. So by having the parts manufactured independently, then he can put them together, and nobody can manufacture his bomb site except for him, and that way he can control who gets it and who doesn't.
And then eventually our good doctor is kidnapped by a professor named Moriarty, played by the character actor Lionel Atwell, who's most known for his horror work. He was in Dr. X and Night at the Wax Museum and several of the Frankenstein sequels. What did you think of what did you think of this rendering of Moriarty, and what did you think of his relationship with Holmes? We spent a lot of time talking to each other in this film.
Moriarty seems to be hit and miss, and this kind of seemed like a little bit weaker Moriarty. Maybe that only is suffering from... Maybe this would have been perfectly satisfactory at the time that it was released, but we have a little bit more attention for baddies now, you know, and so this seemed a little bit of a simplistic Moriarty. And even his demise at the end of the film was kind of like, okay.
You know, you mentioned there's about 14 of these. I think I've probably seen 4 or 5.
Okay.
And I don't know. I assume Moriarty showed up as a regular or semi-regular in some of the earlier ones.
I think I read something about how many Lionel Atwell appeared in. Let me see if I can find it.
Because maybe this would be more satisfying if you'd seen the other ones and had more of a sense of the dynamics. I actually liked them together. They had that kind of meeting of the minds of equals thing going for them. Sometimes it was a little too on the nose.
Yeah.
But it for the
Lionel
most part
Atwell
worked.
played Professor Moriarty at least once before when he did it. Oh, no, sorry. He previously had played James Mortimer in The Hound of Bakersville, which was released in 1939. So he appeared in multiple of these, but not always as Moriarty.
Okay. Interesting. Anyway, Moriarty kidnaps our good scientist, and they have to figure out, Holmes does and Watson, how to get him back. There's a period in which Holmes goes undercover as a sailor, and he gets kidnapped and put in a false bottom of a trunk with the intention to drop him off a boat.
Which also, that sequence includes a really inexplicable bar fight scene.
Oh yeah, the bar fight scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did that have anything to do with anything?
No.
he goes into a bar because he's taking on the persona of a guy that used to work for Moriarty, who's in jail, and so he's pretending to be that guy. He's out of jail and is looking for Moriarty to join back up with him. And so he goes to all these dive bars that are all playing public domain music. And in that one, it's like the first one he goes into, he grabs a bottle.
It's actually a glass that's already on the counter, and someone walks past him and bumps him, and he overreacts, smashes the glass, and holds it up to the guy's throat. And the guy's like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then he puts the glass shards down, and the guy walks away. And that's the end of it.
What did you think of him in all the costumes? Because there's at least there's 3 times in this movie in which he goes undercover.
I actually enjoyed the costumes in this one.
It's very Mission Impossible.
It's fitting to the stories. In the Arthur Conan Doyle's, he's a disguise expert, and he can do his disguises super quick, and things of that nature. So the disguises, I enjoyed that part, in particular the disguise at the beginning of the movie.
So where he's the
old bookseller. Yeah. Yep.
This is a complete works of William Shakespeare, an old German writer.
Yeah.
And so he's the bookseller, he's the sailor, and then at the end he's the 4th scientist.
Yes.
When he tricks Moriarty into kidnapping him rather than the actual scientist.
Yes.
And then Moriarty's lair in this is interesting. It's full of false compartments and not very convincing looking bookshelves and other things. There's a moment where I made a crack about how the set wasn't even finished.
Well, in Moriarty in the books, while he may have a lair, there's nothing that actually takes place in the lair. So for this part of this movie to take place in Moriarty's lair, I was kind of like, eh. Although, did you catch the other connection to the version we just watched last week?
You'll have to remind me.
That his lair is near a boat dock.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was also a moment where they referenced the Tower Bridge.
Yeah. But yeah, one thing that stood out to me is when they show up to his lair, Inspector Lestrade and Holmes and Watson, when you look at that shot first going down and the river's on the left, it looks like the reverse shot of last week when they come out of the slaughterhouse. It looks like the reverse from the opposite angle in that version.
I can see it.
Yeah.
What did you think of Lestrade?
In this one, I didn't care for Lestrade.
Played by Dennis Hoy.
Yeah. Lestrade was significantly better in Terror by Night.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's. I described him in this film as whipped by Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Because he just you get the impression the iconic Lestrade in my head is kind of about Sherlock Holmes. This guy's just like, whatever you want, Holmes.
Well, and it's kind of a mix of the both in the books. Like, he is deferent to Holmes because Holmes is so often right, but also annoyed to be deferent to Holmes and always mouthing off to Holmes and trying to take credit for various things, overplay any role that he takes in any part of the plot. So
all of these characterizations are kind of bland. I think everybody in this film is kind of bland. It doesn't destroy the film, but it's noticeable, or at least I feel like I notice it a lot more now than I did when I first watched them.
I felt like Holmes was the only one that really had significant depth in this one.
And it had a certain charisma.
Yeah.
Nigel Bruce's portrayal of Watson is kind of interesting. He's really just there as a sounding board for Holmes. He doesn't have all that much.
He's also a little bit bumbling. I mean, the way he falls asleep while he's supposed to be playing guard to Dr. Tobler.
And then he's completely shocked to find out that the guy in the costume was Holmes.
Yeah.
Like, he's just
holding the gun on him.
He's just he's there to be just impressed by Holmes.
I thought it was hilarious that Mrs. Hudson realized it was Holmes before
Watson did. That is pretty funny.
Yeah.
I guess we should move on to the second film, unless you have something more you wanted to say about The Secret Weapon.
One other thing that was interesting about this was, in terms of the Moriarty and Holmes interaction, was they're playing off the dueling titles of Watson's story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting.
Watson says, "Well, I write my account of this, I hope to call it The End of Moriarty."
Yeah,
and then Moriarty's, perhaps Watson can call this The End of Holmes.
Yeah. I actually thought that the ending to this one was weaker than Terror by Night because I didn't like Moriarty falling for his own trap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was...
He falls into a trap door.
Yeah, it was predictable. It was lackluster. It was a little bit disappointing.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, so this first one is based on a 1903 Sherlock Holmes story. It's called The Adventure of the Dancing Men. The Dancing Man, because the cipher that he uses, that Tobler uses, consists of stick figures, basically, in different positions. And he has used that as a way to list in a coded way the scientists that he's working with.
Yeah.
In a way that he knows that Holmes will figure out, so that Holmes can track down the scientist if he falls into somebody's clutches. Of course, Moriarty wants to sell him to the Nazis.
Yeah.
Which is probably the biggest update in this story. But anyway, the first three lines of the cipher are traditional left to right, right to left,
Left to right.
But the bottom line is reversed to hide, as an extra layer of precaution, to hide the identity of the fourth scientist. And both Holmes and Moriarty figure this out by pure accident, pure chance. They're both these great geniuses, but they could have very easily not figured this out.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a weird choice.
You brought up something that I was thinking about referencing. You talked about that this was supposed to be an adaptation of The Adventure of the Dancing Men. But the plot of this story is actually, it's an original story based on historical events that happened after Doyle's death.
All right.
The only resemblance to the credited story is a cameo by the secret code of stick figure drawings.
Okay.
That is the only connection to the actual story that they claim it's an adaptation from. There is another moment taken from Doyle's Sign of Four, which is the trail of luminous paint is confused when luminous paint is picked up by wheels of another vehicle at a crossroads and leaves a false trail. So it draws things from two different stories, but the one that it claims that it's adapted from, it's actually an original story that occurred after Conan Doyle's death, and the only connection between the two is the secret code of the stick figures.
Indeed.
So,
moving on to Terror by Night, which I liked more. It's more traditional. It really could be set at any time. It doesn't have the Nazis or any kind of really period-specific element to it. I thought of it as kind of a goofy version of Murder on the Orient Express.
I had kind of a similar thought.
Because there's all these characters on. So Holmes is hired to protect the Star of Rhodesia, which is a diamond belonging to a wealthy English woman who's decided, for some reason, to take it with her on vacation to Edinburgh. And also we have Lestrade on the train, too, to protect it under the... They pretend he's going on vacation.
Yeah.
Like, that's his cover story, but he's clearly not. He's clearly there to try to protect the Star. And after the son of the wealthy woman is murdered fairly early on, they have to talk to the various denizens of the train, many of which are kind of eccentric. There's really not that many of them. I almost wish there were more crazy characters. But you have the couple that stole the teapot from the hotel. It's like, I did it. I have it. It's like, oh, you did it? Yeah. I'll pay twice what it's worth. Just don't get me in trouble.
Well, he also admits that he has a collection of them.
A collection of them, yes.
Yeah.
I collect them.
Yeah.
And then you have got the professor, the crotchety professor who doesn't like being interrupted all the time by questions.
But who seems to leave his compartment an awful lot for someone who's so dedicated to his work.
And then you have Renee Godfrey as Vivian Vedder. It's kind of the femme fatale.
Yeah.
Which is probably the most 1940s thing about the film.
Yeah, and she was quite striking, and
yeah,
I thought she was probably the standout performance of this film, which is interesting considering how much of the film she's quiet.
Yeah,
she appears regularly throughout the film, but just doesn't really say a lot through a lot of it.
I like the scene when they're at the train stops at a certain point to pick up some police assistants that we later find out are not, and she comes out of her little compartment. She's just watching the activity going on.
She does that a lot.
I liked that.
Yeah.
It's like these people are here. And one of the things I really like about this film is the editing. The way they kept going back to the train and emphasizing the fact that you're on a train, which you could say you don't need to. We know we're on a train. But it kind of made it feel more real.
You know, another thing that stood out to me about this was the interior shots inside the train. This was previous to the Murder on the Orient Express with Sean Connery. But some of the shots feel very similar to that Murder on the Orient Express, which makes me wonder if this didn't serve as a little bit of motivation for the cinematography in that rendition.
Yeah.
Did you see those connections?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it's a fine train mystery movie. I like anything that's in a confined space.
What is your favorite train movie?
Well, probably Night Train to Munich. That's the first one that comes to mind.
For me, it would have to be North by Northwest.
North by Northwest is definitely on there.
Yeah.
I also quite like Silver Streak.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, at some point we'll have to do.
Yeah.
I'll have to introduce you to Silver Streak. I wanted on this one I thought this one had the superior dialogue.
It's a little bit smarter at times.
And clever. It's funnier.
The thing that stands out to me about that is, like, the dialogue between Holmes and Lestrade was much better in this one. It was more true to the books in this one, and it was missing a little bit in the previous version.
Yeah, the other one was just so... I mean, the other one had an awful lot to do.
Yeah.
This one could take its time. But here's just a few selections from the dialogue. The young lady has taken her mother to Scotland for burial. In a coffin? That is the customary method, I believe. Thank you, Lady Margaret. I will be as unobtrusive as possible. That would be a novelty from a policeman. My husband gave it to me on our 5th wedding anniversary. 423 carats, isn't it? The original diamond was over 700 carats. Really? To her son. Your father had it cut, less ostentatious. Watson, less ostentatious? It's as big as a duck's egg. And then, try some of this curry. It's excellent. Holmes, ignoring him and speaking to the waiter. Steak and kidney pudding, please. Of course, the Bengal curry doesn't compare with that of Madras. It's the quality of the mutton that makes the difference, don't you think? The meat's unimportant. It's the spices that make the difference. Don't you agree with me, Holmes? Holmes, he hasn't been paying attention to the discussion. What? I say, we're discussing curry. Oh, curry, horrible stuff. Oh, really? One man's meat is another man's poison. These are just fun, unnecessary bits of dialogue that just leaven the film.
You also pointed out pretty quick into the film, this is another moment of the film being a little bit smarter than it needs to be. The name that Lestrade is on the train by. Do you remember that?
Well, the name that he's called?
Yeah.
So Lestrade is going
He's
supposedly...
not booked on the train as Lestrade. He's booked, isn't he booked under the name Isaac Walton?
Well, I don't know if he's booked under that name, but he's claiming that he is going fly fishing up in Scotland. And Holmes makes a crack about how he's doing an excellent impression of Isaac Walton, who I looked up. And he was a 17th century English author best known for his book, The Complete Angler. How many members of the audience, not even today, but in the 1940s, would get that reference? I loved how obscure it is.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was talking
Very
about. This one being a little
Holmesian.
bit smarter than usual. Mm-hmm. Another great shot in this film was when Holmes gets knocked out the open door of the train.
That was really good.
Yeah.
That was very kinetic, and it didn't feel forced, and it just had a great energy. The way it was shot and edited together, you felt a sense of the risk.
Yeah.
Probably more than you should, actually.
I also thought it was entertaining how Holmes and Watson kept asking for permission to do things. Their permission was denied, and then they did it anyway.
Yeah. Well, with the guy in the back room where the coffin is.
Yeah, in the luggage compartment or whatever.
Because there's a scheme to steal the diamond, and it involves having this creepy little guy in a hidden compartment in the fake coffin that the femme fatale was hired to claim she was taking her mother up to Scotland to be buried.
Yeah.
But she was just doing it for money. She didn't really know any of the details of the scheme.
Yeah.
She knew something wasn't right. That creepy guy is creepy. He's just weird looking. He's got a weird voice. He's wearing this weird hat, and he's weird.
Yeah.
And I liked it.
Yeah, it was definitely a different one. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I'll probably watch more of these Basil Rathbones. I don't know that is this your favorite Sherlock Holmes?
You know, it's been so long. No, he's not my favorite portrayal of Sherlock Holmes. We'll get to that later in the month.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I could say off the top of my head that I have a favorite portrayal of Sherlock Holmes. Mm-hmm. But this was an interesting portrayal. I think because there's so many of them, I'll probably come back to this at some point and watch more of them, especially where a bunch of them are public domain.
Yeah, you can find these on YouTube. We watched this as a prepackaged double feature on Amazon.
Yeah. So I'll probably come back and revisit this, but I'm not sure if I would consider Basil Rathbone the best or my favorite Sherlock Holmes. Though his costume change at the beginning of this film was very interesting. You never really see him in a Sherlock Holmes-esque costume.
Yeah, but it's updated.
In the
No deerstalker.
in the Secret Weapon, but in Terror by Night, he's got the coat with the hat. So
Yeah, but it's a different kind of hat. It's a 1940s hat.
it looked similar to the traditional Sherlock Holmes one, and he had the pipe. So which I don't remember. He never smokes a pipe in the
In the first one, actually, it's Watson that you see smoking the pipe at least once or twice.
Yeah. Well, they both smoke a pipe in this one, but you never saw Holmes smoke a pipe in The Secret Weapon, but he does in this one. And the original train shots of the train leaving, the opening sequences where the Edinburgh Express is departing, are actually skillful uses of very short clips from an earlier classic British film called The Rome Express. They just do it in very short clips so that it's, you can't tell.
Yeah. So what would you rate these films?
I'd probably give both of these, I'd probably give The Secret Weapon a 7, and I would give Terror by Night a 6 on the 10-star scale. I'd give them both 2 to 2.5 stars on the 4-star scale. They're solid, they're good, but they are dated, and they are a different pace than like the one we watched last week. So
I would give Sherlock Holmes and The Secret Weapon probably 2 on the 4-star scales and probably 5 or 6 on the 10. And I would give Terror by Night 2.5 stars and probably a 6, maybe a 7 on the 10-star scale.
Yeah, so we're not far apart on these two. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we got to introduce you to this because there's an element of film literacy. I mean, he was, for so long, the iconic Sherlock Holmes.
14 of them, how can you not?
How could he not have been? Yeah.
And even, having not watched them, it's hard, if you're familiar with Sherlock Holmes, it's hard to be aware of the name Basil Rathbone. So, fun stuff. Anything else to add on these?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, we need to draw for next week.
Oh, we do?
Yeah. We're down to 2 films. Yeah. What are we watching next week, Nate?
You tell me. The 7% Solution.
Yeah.
Looking
Which is one
forward
of
to
your
this.
favorites, right?
It may be my favorite Holmes.
Yeah. Cool. All right, we'll be back next week with the 7% Solution. I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. Oh, and by note, and a way of reminder to all of our listeners, because it came to my attention this week, that some of our listeners were not aware that we're available on multiple platforms. So, if you're listening to this on one platform and are interested in listening to us on a different platform, we're available on YouTube. We're available on all podcasting platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google Play. Yeah, we're available everywhere. So, look for us wherever you'd like. But yeah, you can find us on any of the major platforms. So, have a good night.
Adios.
Okay, you ready?
I guess so. The United States, and he's hiding something. He sneaks out at night.
You mean to England?
Yeah, to England.
Yeah. Not the United States.